Alright, it's time for a story to the Flower Princess. Before I start, what I find interesting, I've always been a fan of human psychology, I guess, and, as I said, I was a huge fan of this book as a child, mostly because of the little mouse who couldn't eat cheese. Which is the story in it, but I don't really remember the Flower Print. If I can get to the contents page, I remember Tonga the Growling Tortoise. Don't remember the Flower Princess. I remember Ben rescues a hedgepig. I obviously remember the mouse who couldn't eat cheese, and I don't really remember the Dragon of Blue Mountains. Although I think, I haven't read that. In this book yet, but I think what happens there is he gets rejected because he sneezes a lot, and when he sneezes he breathes fire, and what ends up happening is he starts crying, and his tears put out his flames. I'm not sure I'm going to read that one live, possibly today, I don't know. But what I really don't remember is this one. I have read this one back and I don't remember it at all. I know it wasn't one that I kind of asked for a lot, if ever. And what's interesting is the number of problems, the rest of the stories I've read so far, on camera, I've read basically all of them, apart from the dragon one. I've read, Tonga, I've read The Mouse Who Couldn't Eat Cheese on camera, and I've read Ben Rescues a Hedgepig, and they're all relatively good stories. And I guess this one is, but it just has so many problems, just with the writing and, even with things like the grammar, and everything else. I just found that interesting, that, my least favourite story is one which in many ways doesn't make a lot of sense, but kind of might to a 5-year-old, or an under 5, at least as much as the other stories would. But anyway, let's read. There was once a beautiful queen who lived in Primrose Valley. She was born as Queen of the Flowers, and naturally a lovely young baby daughter was called the Flower Princess. As she was nearly a year old, it was soon to be the birthday of the Flower Princess, and her first birthday was to be a special one. All of the little elves and gnomes and dwarfs from the forest wanted to buy her some lovely presents, but the Flower Queen said no. No one shall buy any presents for the young baby princess, but, she said, she will be pleased to receive any present that you make with your own hands. This predicament set the whole woodland buzzing with excitement, and they all started to decide what they would make for the little princess for a gift. Each of them wanted to give the best present, and this is just what the queen wanted, for they had been rather lazy and disgruntled lately. This will keep them occupied, she thought, and she was right. They took a long time deciding what they would make. I read up through the screen. They took a long time deciding what they would make, and finally some of them said, "We'll make a beautiful big cake for her. with sugar and almonds and icing. It'll be the biggest, loveliest cake of all. Others said, we'll be different. She won't be able to eat cake for she's far too young. She'll be far too young. Let's make her a beautiful doll's house. She'll love that. They started at once cutting up wood and sawing and planing and hammering away merrily. Then a few of them got together and said, we'll make her a beautiful party dress. It will be the finest dress a princess has ever worn, with the finest silks and satins. She will look more beautiful than ever. They started to cut and stitch and sew. There was a little group that said, now she is a princess, and a princess must wear a crown. We will make her a crown of gold and silver, and we'll make it glitter with diamonds. Each little group kept its secret about what it was going to make for a present. I do dig that mouse down there. Kinda looks like whiskers. I don't know if that was deliberate. There was one little dwarf called nomi. Actually, he wasn't called that because he had no name at all, so they just called him Noni. He was the gardener, and he was very upset because all he could do was grow flowers. He couldn't make anything at all with his hands. It was true that he looked after the flowers, but everyone knew that you can't make real flowers, not with your hands. You can only help them to grow. One day he was sitting looking most unhappy when a little fairy hopped onto his knee. "Why do you look so worried and sad?" she asked. And the little dwarf told her, "I can't make anything. I am a gardener. I can only help things to grow, and I did want to do something." "Well, what would you like to make for the princess?" asked the fairy. "I would like to make her happy," Noni said. "What a beautiful answer. I shall see to it that you will." Noni the dwarf looked at the fairy for a moment, and she smiled at him. "You are going to make something with your own hands," he said. With a wave of her wand, she tapped the ground, and suddenly there was a little violin and bow. "You're going to make music with your hands, Noni," said the little fairy. "This is a magic violin, and when you play it, it will make the flowers grow. They will spring up from the ground as you play. Just try it and see." The little dwarf could hardly believe his eyes. He picked up the violin and drew the bow gently across the strings. Then, as he played on, he noticed that the climbing roses were climbing even higher. When he stopped, the roses stopped. Noni laughed and clapped his hands with joy. "Thank you, little fairy," he said. "Now I can go to the palace and make my present to the princess." The great day came when they all took their presents to the little princess. When they all arrived, she happened to be crying. She was only 1 year old after all. "Just wait till she sees her presents," one of them said. "She'll stop crying then for sure." And they uncovered the giant birthday cake. The queen thanked them and was very happy and proud of them, but the poor little princess still cried. "Let's see what she thinks of our present," said some others, and they brought out the great big doll's house. The queen was delighted, but the little princess hardly saw a thing through her tears. "This might stop her crying," said another little group. They showed her the lovely party dress they had made. The queen was overjoyed and thanked them too, but the little baby princess just was still weeping. Next, the others showed her the lovely crown that they had made, and the queen saw how beautiful it was. And still the princess wept on and on. There's a squirrel. That's quite cool. I do like the artwork. Mind you, the artwork in Ladybird books. The quality was always quite high. Then stepped up little Noni the dwarf, and someone said, "What have you brought?" Noni said, "I have these little plant pots full of earth." "You can't give a princess pot of earth," they cried. They were going to push him out, but Noni waved his little violin that the fairies had brought him. Someone shouted, "Any present given here has to be made with your hands only." Noni replied, "Yes, I know. I am going to make music with my hands. Just see what happens. Keep your eyes on the little flower pots." They all stared at the flower pots, and Noni the dwarf began to play. Suddenly the earth in the pots began to move upwards. Then a flower broke through, and as the little dwarf played, the most lovely flower as the little dwarf played, the most lovely flowers they had ever seen began to bloom in front of their eyes. The sound of music stopped, and the sound of music stopped the little princess crying, and she too looked at the flowers growing. And then the little embroidered flowers on her coverlet of her bed began to grow too, even the flowers on the wallpaper. And when they looked out the window, the garden was a mass with blossom. The queen couldn't believe it. She told Noni that this was the most wonderful present of them all, and just the right for the flower princess. "What is your name, little man?" she asked. "They call me Noni, that's because I haven't got a name," he replied. "Nonsense," said the queen. You not only have a name, you have a job too. From now on you will be the royal gardener. What's more, we shall all affectionately call you Green Fingers. And to this day, all the people who are clever at growing things in the garden are called just that. All in honour of the little dwarf who wanted to make a princess happy. The little dwarf called Green Fingers. I mean, I guess it's an okay story all told. The most obvious problem I have is this thing about his name. He was called Noni. All the dwarfs knew him as Noni. Everybody knew him as Noni. And therefore surely that was his name. A name is a tag that people can use to sort of recognise or address a particular individual, and that's what Noni was to Noni / Green Fingers. Another problem I had when I first read it through was this use of capital letters. Got all this white garlic still. Yeah, the use of capital letters. When I read it through this time, actually, I noticed that it was only the Queen actually that used these capital letters. So that was actually quite clever, I guess. I was thinking, why not use italics if you want to emphasise emphasise something. And yet another problem. This just doesn't make sense. They took a long time. We'll make a beautiful cake for sugar and almonds. You'll be the greatest present of them all. Then the others said, we'll be different. She won't be able to eat cake because she's far too young. And then a few paragraphs down, each little group kept its secret about what it was going to make as a present. And, from the context, we can only assume that they were keeping it a secret from, each other, what they were making. So how did group 2 know that they were going to be any different? How did they know that the first group, was going to make a cake? And then there's all the long words, disgruntled and embroidered, and I'm guessing this wasn't, no, it says early learning is vital, but I'm guessing this wasn't a book that was designed to be read by a child. I don't know how we feel about that. I guess I've got no problem with I don't know, would a child necessarily understand that story? Would a child be interrupting every 2 minutes with, what does this word mean and what does that word mean, and, how do you explain disgruntled? Would you want to explain the word disgruntled? Would you need to like a 2-year-old child, which I think is what this is aimed at, 2-3-year-old children, old enough to be read stories, too young to go to school. So it's just interesting to me that the story I liked least of all, or possibly the story I liked least of all, because like I said, I think I do remember the dragon story a little bit, but I simply didn't remember that, green fingers at all. It was like it was the first time I read it, when I read it through before. It's just interesting to me that the story that I liked least as a child is kind of the story that I like least of all now, although I don't really like it least of all. I probably like the Ben Rescues a Hedgepig least of all, to be honest, just because it's a little bit slow, especially at first. Is it really necessary to have pages explaining exactly what you did with that milk? I don't know, but you know what I mean. So that's that. And I may have time to read that dragon story, but I might wait until later. I don't know. Doesn't really matter.